A long time ago, I took a public speaking class put on by Dale Carnegie, or the Dale Carnegie Company. And it was based on the public speaking class he taught way back in the day during the Great Depression. And the stuff that they collectively learned during this speaking class is what led to the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It was one of the more better classes that I've taken. It lasted 12 weeks, and we would meet once per week and practice public speaking, but they also taught us a lot of persuasion techniques. And there is one fantastic persuasion technique, one very effective persuasion technique, that when you learn this technique, when you apply this technique, you'll start to see it everywhere. I recently read Dr. Cialdini's book, Persuasion, which is based on how you can prime people's brains, how you can do something before your persuasive message, and when you do the thing, you'll make their brain more fertile to be more receptive to your message. And there's a lot of fantastic tricks in there, techniques, how to pre-frame the conversation, so before you even start a persuasive conversation with someone, their brain has already been primed, already been made fertile, so your ideas can grow in their brain more bountifully. If you've ever watched the TV show Vikings, there's this fantastic episode where the English finally decide to give the Vikings some land for farming purposes, so hopefully the Vikings will stop attacking and killing the English. And they have this kind of joint fertility ritual thing they're going to do. And in order to do this ritual, the Vikings slaughter some animals. They take the blood from the animals, they dump it all over themselves, and they dance around and make these chants to the gods while they're doing the fertility ritual. And of course, the English, the Christian English, are looking on to the Vikings as if they are these absolute lunatic barbarians. But there is some truth to this ritual, because blood is a very, very good fertilizer. And so somewhere back in time, someone accidentally discovered that if you pour blood on the ground, it will make the ground more fertile, so stuff can grow much more bountifully from the soil. And because they didn't know any science, they somehow equated this to figuring out what the gods wanted. And so they combined this pre-scientific understanding with some kind of religious ritual so they would remember to do this and keep being able to grow stuff in the ground. I used to go to this Toastmasters meeting where there's this one girl that came occasionally, a young woman, and she was a graduate student getting her PhD in psychology or psychiatry or something. And one meeting she gave a speech and told us about this absolute fantastic experiment she did. She was taking this class in psychology that was all about how to prime the patient's brain. Because when a patient comes in to see a psychiatrist, they're often in this kind of stuck state of mind. And so before you even start talking about the problem, before you even start talking about the solution, it's a good idea to prime their brain, to pre-frame the conversation. So before you even start talking about any kind of solution, their brain has become much more fertile for the ideas to take root and grow more bountifully in their brain. So she had all these techniques. And her neighbor was this Girl Scout, and it was her first time selling cookies. And so the psychiatry student hatched this fantastic plan. She would go through the neighborhood, knock on doors, the same neighborhood that the Girl Scout would later go through. She would knock on doors. She would talk to the homeowners, and she came up with a cover story that she was a new member of this new religion in town, and she wasn't here to sell Jesus. I'm not here to ask you for money. I just want to tell you about who I am, tell you about our organization. Would it be okay if I talk to you for a few minutes? And most people would say, sure, why not? And she would tell these very, very convoluted stories, hypnotically nested stories, where you start off with a story, then there's another story that doesn't relate to the first story, then there's another story that doesn't relate to this story. Then you tell this middle story. And in this middle story is where you put all the hypnotic technology. This is where you put all the embedded commands. This is where you put all the blurred reality statements, the quotes patterns, where you're not sure if I'm talking to you or if I'm a character talking to another character in this story. And you put in all the post-hypnotic suggestions down in this middle story. And so in this middle story, she would, after having faded the brain of the homeowner, she would tell them all these post-hypnotic suggestions, because when you buy things, it's a sign of being successful. The more you buy things, the more you're sending a message to yourself and your future self that you are financially successful. Buying things, when you decide to buy things, it's a sign to yourself that you are financially successful. Because after all, what is an economy? You have a lot of skills. You have a lot of success. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here talking to you. And your job as a human, your purpose as a human is to go out into the world and apply your skills to the world and then receive money in exchange for those skills. And then take that money and buy the things that you want and buy the things that you need. And of course, because you're a healthy individual, you know the importance of a balanced diet. And you know that occasionally you can eat some cookies. You can buy some cookies, because every time you eat a cookie, you're sending a message to yourself that you are healthy, that you are successful, that you are a productive member of society. When you eat cookies, you're successful. When you buy things, you're successful. When you eat cookies, you're admired in the neighborhood. When you buy things, you're admired in the neighborhood. When you help children, you're successful. When you help children, you're admired in the neighborhood. And she would go on and on and on with these complex equivalents that she would deliver deep down in the middle part of this hypnotic story. Then she would finish the other loops, and they would forget this middle part. But they would not remember to forget to apply the learnings from this middle part. They would remember the learnings from the middle part, but they would forget the content of this middle part. And then she would go off to the next house. And then an hour later, the Girl Scout would come by, and an hour later the homeowner would have this vague memory that some young woman came by their house and told them all these stories, but they wouldn't remember these stories. They wouldn't be able to remember the content of these stories. And the Girl Scout would say, "Hi, I'm selling Girl Scout cookies." And the homeowner would say, "Oh my gosh, cookies. For some reason, that's the greatest idea ever. I'll take all you're selling." And that Girl Scout sold more cookies than anybody else in her troop. When she first started, she was afraid because it was a competitive troop where they have contests to motivate them to sell cookies, and she was worried she was going to come in last place. But because the psychiatry student went through the neighborhood first and primed the brains of all the homeowners, they bought more cookies than anybody else. One of the more famous and interesting battles of history is between Rome and Carthage, or Hannibal, the Battle of Cannae around 200 BC, 216 I think BC. And Hannibal, who was a brilliant general, he absolutely slaughtered the Romans. And between 10 or 50 and 70,000 Roman troops were slaughtered on this big field in southern Italy. And according to historians, there was so much blood spilled on this battlefield that field was fertilized with the blood of so many Roman soldiers that the harvests were double for like 10 years. And they just grow twice as much stuff for 10 years because of all the blood that fertilized the earth, that sunk down deep into the earth and made the earth more fertile so that the stuff would grow more bountifully later on. One of the interesting techniques from Cialdini's books, or one of the interesting experiments they talked about, how to prime people's brain, where they did an experiment with two different people. Two different people from a company, a legitimate company, went out into the world. They talked to people. They were wearing company attire. They had company credentials. And the first guy would say, "Hi, I'm from XYZ company. We make such and such product. We're having a promotion coming soon. Can I have your email?" And only 30% of people gave their email. The other guy said, "Hi, I'm from XYZ company. We're out in the neighborhood telling people about ourselves. Here's my credentials. We're having a promotion. Oh, by the way, can I ask you a question?" "Sure, go ahead." "You seem like an adventurous person. Do you consider yourself an adventurous person?" And most people said yes. And once they asked the person if they considered themselves an adventurous person, and they said yes, their brains were now primed. Then they asked for the email. And because they had previously said, "I'm an adventurous person," giving somebody an email is congruent with that self-description, that self-described label. And so they got a 70% success rate. By not priming the brain, just asking for the email, they got 30%. But by priming the brain first, by getting them to admit to being an adventurous person, they got a 70% success rate. And that's how you can prime people's brains to make it more fertile for your ideas to get in there and grow more bountifully. And this is exactly what they taught in Dale Carnegie class. One of the Dale Carnegie tips that you'll learn if you read How to Win Friends and Influence People is give them something to live up to. Give them a positive label that they would like to accept, and then ask them to do something that is congruent with that positive label, and they'll be much more likely to do that thing. And this idea of pre-framing the brain or persuading the brain or priming the brain is a great way to become more persuasive. It's a great way to become more seductive. And that's why I liked this public speaking course, because it not only taught public speaking, but it taught all these persuasion techniques. And if you can combine skills in public speaking with skills in persuasion, you can make a lot of money. If you'd like to learn more, check out the links below. Thanks for watching. Please let me know what you think in the comments. And please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.